Thank you for attending the May 2015 Virtual Technology Summit Systems track. My name is Eric Benner, and I'm hosting the Red Hat Linux to Oracle Linux session this quarter. Please stand by. We'll start the session promptly on time. One thing I'd like to point out to everyone that's following the session, please use the chat system. During the live sessions, I will be here and answering questions. First, let me introduce myself for those of y'all that don't know me. My name is Eric Benner. I work for Mythix, which is an Oracle Platinum partner in the Technology Solutions Group team, where we work with Oracle solutions, Oracle on Oracle, through the entire Oracle stack, the hardware, the software, the applications, anywhere down from the network all the way up into like the e-business application tier. My background with these technologies has been quite diverse and long for the time. I started using Linux around 92. Was actually before that using an x86 platform called Kodak Unix, which later became Interactive Unix. Is a Unix distribution for Intel technology. Picked up Solaris back in 96. I'm also very involved with the different user groups. IOUG and OAUG specifically. Work heavily with the Solaris SIG, is the SIG leader for IOUG. Also work a lot with the storage SIG there. Also work with the different EM SIGs, both IOUG and OAUG for the Enterprise Manager SIGs. And also the rack SIG with IOUG. I do have a personal blog, talesfromthedatacenter.com. I'm also a frequent blogger at the Mythix blog, which is mythix.com/blog. My email address is here on the page, and I also have my Twitter handle on here, and I do tweet frequently with a new post. So first we're going to cover what we're going to cover through the agenda. We're going to talk a little bit about why Oracle Linux. Because the second part, we're going to do the Red Hat to Oracle Linux migration. It's actually a pretty straightforward process now. But I get more questions actually on why move from Red Hat Linux than the actual technology behind moving to Oracle Linux. And then after we've migrated a box, we'll go ahead and handle any questions and answers. But again, feel free to ask during the session if you have any questions. So first I'd like to talk a little bit about Oracle and their history with Linux. Oracle's been doing Linux for a long time. A lot of people don't always realize how long they've been doing it. They started in 2002, making a large commitment to supporting the Linux operating system. 2005, Oracle started seeing customers really adopting Linux as an operating system. It really became a way of running enterprise systems. In 2006, Oracle made a rather large announcement. They started their Linux support program, Unbreakable Linux Support, and that launched their distribution of Linux, which became Oracle Linux. In 2007, Oracle launched their own VM, Oracle VM, that was based on top of the Linux operating system. In 2009, Oracle made a very large acquisition of Sun Microsystems. And that's when we started seeing this theme from Oracle of hardware and software engineered to work together. And that's a theme that we're seeing more and more now as engineered systems start evolving. And we're also seeing this happening at the hardware in the systems as well. Things like the upcoming M7 chip on the Spark side. We've seen this in places like the storage arrays, where the database technology is talking to the OS. We're even seeing this in Linux. With technologies like dtrace moving into the kernel. In 2011, Oracle purchased Ksplice. This was a really good thing for any Linux admins out there. It's because this now enables us as a Linux admin to update our kernel on our server without actually having to reboot the operating system. We'll talk a little bit more about that. 2012, Oracle continued releasing Linux distributions, flavors, or release numbers, however you want to call it. 2012, we saw 6.3 released. From my point of view, that's probably one of the more common distributions I've seen to date. 2013, there's an update to K-Splice that came on called Offline Edition. We'll talk a little bit more, but this is really just showing Oracle is continuing to evolve with Linux, and they're continuing to support the operating system. In 2014, last year, we saw Linux 7 released. This was a big update for Linux. A lot of changes in the infrastructure as a sysadmin, the commands we use to maintain and manage the systems. We also saw support from Oracle for OpenStack for Oracle Linux, and we also saw Linux containers. Linux containers are similar to a technology that most of the Oracle Solaris admins have seen for years called zones. And this gives that type of a technology inside of Linux. And then this last year, 2015, we saw Oracle announce and release Docker support with actually certified, fully supported Oracle images in the Docker Hub registry. So over the last 13 years, we've seen Oracle growing the commitment to Linux. I've also seen more and more adoption of Oracle Linux in the enterprise, not just for the Oracle workload, but also for the non-Oracle workload due to some of the advantages of the distribution. One of the favorite quotes I love from Vim is he talks about how he spends 50% of his time making Linux a better operating system, and 50% of that time of his group making Oracle run really well on Linux. It shows it's a two-way street. It's not just Oracle adopting Linux, but Oracle actually contributes to the Linux core itself. When I was doing some research for this VTS, I was looking at some of the changes made and the numbers of them. And one thing that really surprised me is the number of changes that Oracle made. Oracle made more changes to the Linux kernel than companies like Cisco, Fujitsu, AMD, Broadcom. They even made more changes to the kernel than the Linux Foundation itself. And to me, that really shows Oracle's commitment to Linux. And it shows how Oracle is making Linux a better operating system. So one thing you have to understand with Oracle Linux is it's really two different kernels that we work with. The first kernel is a Red Hat compatible kernel. That's an Oracle Linux kernel that pretty much looks just like a Red Hat kernel. Full compatibility. If Red Hat does it, Oracle does it. You still have some advantages when you go to Oracle Linux using this kernel. It's less expensive than Red Hat support. But the real advantages are on the other kernel, which is the Unbreakable Enterprise kernel. Both kernels are free. They're both open source, so there's really not a difference price-wise between them. But what you really see is in the YuiK kernel, it's really a more modern kernel. It has a lot more features available to it. And in a lot of the packages, a lot of the components inside the kernel are just a lot more up-to-date than the Red Hat kernel. It ends up performing better than the Red Hat kernel and gives you some rather interesting options like K-Splice, which we'll talk about. Interesting note is it doesn't matter what kernel you pick between Red Hat compatible kernel or the YuiK kernel. The support pricing is the same for both. There's no cost difference to you to pick either kernel. You also in either kernel have access to the Oracle Linux support program. That has a lot of advantages I've found over other companies' models, and we'll talk about that here shortly. I'd like to spend a little time talking about the Unbreakable Enterprise kernel. It has some neat features to it. One is this data integrity check. It actually, when the I/O happens to the drive, there's actually an API that it uses to check it, and it validates that the data is what we expect it to be. It eliminates that silent data corruption that you don't realize is happening. I've seen this before with other kernels where you have something going on with the hardware, and the database or the application writes data to the disk, and you think that's the data that's written until you go back to read it later, and then something's not quite right with the data, but you thought you wrote it correctly. Built into the YuiK kernel is data integrity. It keeps that from happening in the system. We've also seen several updates with hardware in the kernel, the fault management. It's really gotten to be a much better fault management system out there. Helps keeping the hardware up and running, and it reduces the system crashes for things like failed DIMMs, failed memory chips, etc. There's also a lot of diagnostic tools added into the YuiK kernel. The most important one I touch is going to be dtrace, which was actually created by Sun Microsystems, that company I mentioned earlier that Oracle acquired. Dtrace is really neat with the kernel because it allows me to troubleshoot the kernel real time on a production system. It gives me real-time visibility into the kernel on what it's doing. I can do something very simple, like just show me what files are being opened by a process. I could look internal into a process, and I can see where the I/O is, where the locks are, where the I/O is happening, and look for blocking I/O and identify what's causing it very quickly using dtrace. I also get premier backporting. We'll talk a little bit about that as well, but it's a really good thing if you're a system admin. Makes your life a lot easier in getting upgrades to the operating system through your users. There's also a lot of other performance improvements I've seen in the YuiK kernel over the years. It simply performs faster. Some notable ones, SSD performance is noticeably faster. InfiniBand performance is notably faster. And even just regular I/O is noticeably faster on the YuiK kernel. Talk a little bit here about Ksplice and what it gives you. It allows you to patch your kernel with zero downtime. So if you're a sysadmin or a project manager, you don't have to go to the application and say, I need a 3-hour window for you to shut down your application, and then I have to patch the operating system and reboot and make sure everything comes up okay, and then you can start your application back up. Ksplice allows me to patch the kernel while the system is running with no outage. Now, I still have to patch the rest of the system using a tool called YuiK, standard patching method, but I don't have to restart the kernel itself. What happens is the servers connect with using the YuiK kernel. They connect to the Unbreakable Linux network, either over the internet or through a mirrored copy of it with the offline option. And then the updates are dynamically applied to the kernel based off of the data from that communication. It's not quite the same as patching with a standard YuiK command, but it is a simple one command called uptrack to do it. The advantage, though, if you use the ULN, the Unbreakable Linux network, to do this, is you can track the status of all your servers. You actually get an inventory of all your systems you can use, and not only determine what's patched and what's not patched, but you get a lot of other information about the servers. Again, I want to stress this is not a magic bullet. It does patch the kernel, run the kernel live. I don't have to reboot. I still have to update the RPMs as I normally would. And I still have to restart services like SSH as an example after I've patched the SSH daemon. However, a couple things there is most of the things you can restart, like SSH or the web server, are very quickly restarted with a minimal to no outage. And if you're creative, you can use Enterprise Manager to automate a lot of the process. Not only using scripts from Enterprise Manager to patch the kernel using Ksplice, but also use the same script to patch the operating system and restart services like SSH, named, HTTPD, etc. Premier backporting is another area I like to talk about. If you're ever a sysadmin and you're working with another vendor and you get an update, the vendor will say, I'm sorry, you're on this version. And in order to get the security patch, you actually have to upgrade your OS to the latest and greatest version, and then you get your security patch, or you get the patch that solves a critical problem that causes your machine to panic. What Oracle's done with backporting is they've taken the same method they use for patching database, and they allow you to patch your system with a patch that's available from a newer version without forcing you to upgrade to that version. There's some rules around it, mainly the 6-month rule, but it's basically the same way that Oracle does it today with regular Oracle products. You have a 6-month window, though, that you can't be more than 6 months behind. So for those of you going, oh, this is great, I never have to upgrade again, I just run for 12 years. Well, Oracle will support you for 12 years, but you're not going to get the backporting that far back. An example is there's a bug in the kernel you found for the 238.36 kernel, but the latest version Oracle supported is 299.1. Oracle will actually backport the kernel patch to you to take you to 36.3. It's the same kernel you're running on, just with a fix for the problem that you hit, without forcing you to upgrade the whole system to the 299.1 version of the kernel. This gets into why a lot of people go to Oracle Linux, is for the Oracle support. There's a couple things you get. It's a little different than other companies. One is you have access to patches, not only to the public.yum.oracle, which are the free ones, you also have access to the ones at linux.oracle.com. You have 24/7 phone and web support, and this is actually kind of helpful, especially if you have a mix of skill sets with people supporting your systems. You have somebody that's not quite so senior and you have a problem at 2 o'clock in the morning, they actually have somebody they can call at 2, 3 a.m. in the morning and get help on a system with a problem. You have the backporting, and that's a big advantage in Premier support. You don't have to go to your application teams and say, we have to do a whole upgrade of your system. We're actually able to get this critical security patch for the older version, and we'll need to plan an upgrade in the next 3 or 4 months. You also have lifetime support. It doesn't sound like a lot, but if you look at some of the other vendors and you look at what they support, I've had customers that are still on Oracle Linux 4, and they're running today. They're on older hardware and they're planning a refresh, but it's still an older system. They can still call Oracle and get support for that. You go to some of the other vendors, if you have old hardware, you're on an old OS, they won't support you anymore. There's just the support option's gone. You also have, with the Oracle support, really neat is Enterprise Manager and Op Center. And these tools give you monitoring, especially with Enterprise Manager Cloud Control. Not only can I monitor the operating system, a lot of internals to the operating system, I could even take that monitoring as a single pane of glass and monitor into the database, the web logic, even the application itself. And the application monitoring with tools like RHEL that allow me to look at what's going on the network between with the user in the server and actually sniff in between there and see what the user's doing. You have this integration you don't get with other vendors. You also get cluster file systems built in for free. You don't pay extra for it. So you have Clusterware, which is Oracle's clustering software. You build resource groups just like you do with other technologies like HACMP or Veritas. Works very similar, same concept, same idea. And you have cluster file systems for free built into it. The two most notable are OCFS2, which is Oracle's cluster file system 2, and ACFS, which is a cluster file system you see mainly on the database side. So you're starting to see that more and more in there. Especially with ACFS, I now have the ability to do snapshots and clones. And that's built in if you want to use it. You don't pay any extra for it. We've talked a little bit also about the zero time with K-Splice. And another one for those of you who've been around a long time, if you remember this little company called SCO, Oracle provides that legal protection. So if another SCO was to come out there, if you're on Oracle Linux, they protect you against that. For those that weren't around a long time, SCO was suing anyone that used Linux, said they stole some Linux, got a lot of money from some people. A lot of people said we weren't going to pay you, it just caused a lot of headache. Oracle provides that type of protection. You don't have to worry about if another SCO was to come out as a patent troll, so to speak. So now let's talk about what we're actually going to do today in the hands-on part of the lab. The first thing is I'm going to make an assumption here that you're already running Red Hat Linux. I'm going to be using 6.5. I happen to be running my system in VirtualBox. For those that aren't familiar with VirtualBox, it's a free hypervisor for your desktop. It allows you to run multiple virtual machines on your notebook or your PC. We're going to boot this Red Hat 6.5 machine, and we're going to point it to the public Yum repository. This will give us the ability to point it to get patches from the public server from Oracle. We'll then go ahead and patch the server with Yum. Yum being the patch tool that we use in the environment, and that'll update the server. We'll then boot the server, and from that point, it'll actually be a Red Hat compatible kernel. It's a Red Hat system at that point, once we come back up. We'll then install the YuiK R3 kernel. While we do go to Red Hat, we get a lot of the main advantages, the performance, the K-Splice, the clustering technologies in the YuiK kernel. So we'll go ahead and install that. We'll also make sure that grub, which is our bootloader, we'll make sure that that's going to boot to the YuiK kernel. And then we'll go ahead and we'll boot to the YuiK R3 kernel. At that point, we're up and running, and we are on Oracle Linux. It's 2 reboots, and your existing Red Hat server with everything it was running is now migrated to the newer, faster YuiK R3 kernel. So the first thing here is we want to make sure that our system is running in VirtualBox. And for the networking for this, do something a little different. I make sure that my adapter on the VirtualBox is actually a bridged adapter. This gives the machine access to the internet. It also is really neat that it allows me to SSH on the machine from anywhere I can on the notebook, the network that it's on. So I could have my machine hosted across the office and be running a little demo there and actually have somebody else connect to my Oracle machine and access it over the network. So I'll bring up here so you can see on my VirtualBox Manager, I already have my Red Hat to Oracle Linux VM running. I can go in my settings under my network, and you'll see I have a bridged adapter here. Here I happen to be running on a gigabit connection. And my machine's up and running with a console preview. And I also have SSH up and running. I've already SSH'd into it. If you don't know the IP address, you do an ifconfig ether0, and that'll tell you the IP address of the machine. Here again, I've already SSH'd into my system. I'm going to go ahead and look at it. I'm going to look for my Red Hat release file. So it's going to show me that I'm on 6.5 version of Red Hat Enterprise Server. So the next thing we're going to do is a couple things. We're going to point the system over to the Yum repository. We're going to remove the Oracle repository, and we're going to go ahead and get our encryption key from Oracle. The encryption key is there to help us with the security. While the system can automatically get the encryption key, I always like to manually get it the first time and double check it just to make sure everything's running smooth. I've seen a lot of instances where firewalls will step on the keys. So we're going to go ahead and switch back over to my PuTTY session. And you can see we're back on PuTTY here. I'll try to move the window. So we're going to go into the Yum repository. And this is the directory that has all the Yum repos. Here we simply have the Red Hat one. So we're going to move the repo, and we're going to call this costly. Now you can see we have just one file in there. We're now going to use a utility called wget. Wget allows me to download a file from the internet or from a web server. Without actually having to log on, transfer it to my PC, and then pull it straight to the machine. We're going to go get the key file. And we're going to output it. So we're going to go use wget, download the file, and we're going to put it into the etcpki directory. And I typoed something, RPM. So you know this is recorded live. So now I have the file. Now I want to go ahead and check the file. I'll go to the next step here. So now I want to check the file. Again, I've just seen some problems over the years where firewalls, especially in public sector, I've seen some firewalls have some really weird things where instead of getting this big file that you would expect, you get an error message that says I couldn't download the file. Or you'll get a redirect that instead of the file, it says the file's been downloaded, click here to go download it. So just to make sure everything's okay, I'm going to go more of the file, and I'm going to make sure that key block is there. And I would expect that key block to be there, but I like to be sure. If it's not there, this is a good time to look at how you connect to the internet. Make sure that you can connect to the internet. Make sure your firewall allows you to download straight to servers. Obviously, we now have a key file, and it looks what I would expect a key file to look like. I haven't memorized this one, but it really doesn't tell me for sure that that's the legitimate key file. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to run a utility that's actually going to let us analyze the key file and compare a fingerprint from the key file we downloaded to a fingerprint that Oracle's published for their file. And we want to make sure that fingerprint matches, and that tells us that we have the right key file here and that we can use that key file to automatically check the downloads to make sure they're signed correctly and they're legitimate. There's two places the fingerprint's published at Oracle. One, you'll see at public-yum.oracle.com. You'll also see the fingerprint published in the documentation at Oracle. So we'll go back to our shell session here. We'll go ahead and run the utility. And we're now going to get the kit signature of it. And I'm going to look at that signature. I can go compare it to the public YUM or the Oracle docs. And I'll see that that signature matches the Oracle one. So I know I have a good key file. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to download the repository file from Oracle's public YUM server. And I'm using this Handson lab using the free YUM server. If you have Oracle support, you'll just use a different location for your repo. It'll be configured a little bit differently. But here we're going to go ahead and use the Oracle public YUM repo. We're going to use the same wget command. We're going to pull down that repo configuration file. And that'll tell our server where to get its patches from. So we're going to use wget, webget. So now we went and we got our file, and I'm just going to make sure we got the right one. So I can see that I have data in the file. By default, the standard latest repository is enabled. There's other repositories in here for the different releases that are disabled. There's other ones enabled in here for things like add-ons from Oracle, YuiK that are by default disabled. The MySQL repos in here, Spacewalk in here. A lot of these additional feature repositories are by default disabled, but we can enable those later. So now that we have it labeled, we have it pointed to the Oracle server. The next thing we need to do is we need to remove one package. So I'm going to kick off the remove here. And we're going to remove this package because it's no longer needed. It's only used by Red Hat. Is a plugin for the reporting. And we're going to use this -y option when we remove the package. That's going to tell it to say automatically, yes, do what I want to do. So it'll go ahead and connect to the Oracle repository. It'll go ahead and sync to that. It'll figure out what packages have to be removed. Are there dependencies that can be removed? And it'll automatically go ahead and remove everything. This can take a couple minutes. It all depends on your internet speed. Once this package is done, we're going to go ahead and run a new YUM update, which will automatically download and patch the entire system and take us to the Oracle compatible, the Red Hat compatible kernel. So I'll put this up here. You can see the erase running here. And if you have any questions, this is a good time to ask them in the chat window. Okay, we're almost done here with the package remove. So if you have any questions, this would be a good time. So now what we're done, it'll tell us the packages it removed and any dependencies we could remove. Then we'll go ahead and we'll run a yum-y and update. And this will go ahead and automatically pull everything down as of the latest and greatest today and take us to the latest version of Oracle Linux. This will take a couple minutes, depending on the internet. So we'll let this run a little bit here. And again, if you have any questions on what we're doing or what we've come across so far, please ask. So we can see here we're going to install 15 packages. We're actually going to upgrade 323 packages. So this is a little more than the last time I ran it. It'll go fairly quick once you get to this stage. Right now we're downloading the packages. One of the things also you can do in the system is point your web browser to the public yum.oracle.com. And if you drill down there, you can actually see all the packages that are available to Oracle users. I'll bring up my browser while we patch. I think if you scroll down, you can go into the repo directory, and there's the Docker images I talked about earlier. And I can go into Oracle Linux, go into Oracle Linux 6, and go into latest, which will show me my latest repo. Or I can go in OpenStack, we'll look in OpenStack. Go for the platform, and this will show all the packages that are available in the OpenStack repository. And you can see Oracle's also made quite a large commitment to OpenStack recently. And if you're looking for a technology there to do some data center automation and building infrastructure, it's definitely a technology to look at. And if I look in latest, go on the right platform, 64-bit, actually download a list of all the packages, and you can actually see the package names and versions. It's really amazing, honestly, how many packages I've gone where I needed, and they were already in the Oracle Yum server. I saw here Squid as an example. Was in here. Squid's a proxy engine. Use it to proxy internet traffic and cache it. Very powerful tool. So we're done downloading all 338 packages. Now we're applying them. We have 664 steps for applying here. So that'll take it another couple minutes. Another one I'll look at while we're waiting for this to run. Look at linux.oracle.com. And if you're not familiar with this is a great place to look. Not only do you have a lot of documentation here, you have actual source code. Again, Oracle is very much supporting the open source behind Linux. And you can actually go here and download the Linux source code for yourself. The documentation, standard documentation here as well. Another thing, if you're a larger enterprise client, there's a great reference here where you can set up your own local Yum server. So you can set up a server and actually mirror the Oracle system at your location and then point all of your systems to your local Yum server. Reduces the bandwidth needed between your systems and Oracle since it's all hitting the local system. It's also a way to manage how you synchronize those files. So you can go on your own like quarterly system. You can do your Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4 through the year and maintain consistency across systems that way when you patch. So when you patch your dev system this week and you patch your production system 6 weeks from now, you can actually have them going against the exact same patch set by building your own Yum repository. So we're about half, just not quite the halfway mark. And a common question I get on why Oracle Linux, is it really that much faster? And it really is. There's a lot of things that I've seen in the YuiK kernel that just take the same hardware, take the system to the YuiK kernel, and it is definitely noticeably faster. I've also seen a lot more stability out of it. Systems just don't seem to panic as much running YuiK. So I'm going to take a minute here and hit the hurry up and speed up button. Okay, so now that I've hit the speed up button, we just skipped a couple more minutes of it downloading. But we've already gone ahead now and actually patched the system. We haven't done anything yet, so I can use a uname and see the kernel's up. I'll still see the version I'm at, which is 32.431. I'm going to go ahead and reboot the system now. I also have in the box here to the right my console. So here's my console under VirtualBox, so we can watch the system reboot. Luckily, it doesn't take too long for VirtualBox to cycle a VM. First thing you'll notice too when it boots, it's no longer going to say Red Hat. So here in a minute, we'll see it says Oracle Linux Server. You also see now we're on 6.6. So we've already done the upgrade, and now we're up and running. You can also see here is the kernel has gone, we've already patched the machine, and we've gone to a new kernel version. We were on 2.6.32.431, and now we're on the 5.04 kernel. I'm going to go ahead and log back in with PuTTY. I can repeat the uname, and we'll see we're on the newer kernel. Now look at the Red Hat release file, and I'll see I'm now on 6.6. What I also have that's new is an Oracle release file that shows I'm also on 6.6. So at this point, we are on Oracle Linux. We're simply with the compatible kernel. So the next thing we're going to do is to go to the YuiK kernel. You really want the performance advantages of the YuiK, and for the future, I want to be able to patch the system with ksplice. So the first thing I'm going to do is go into my repository file, and I'm going to turn on the YuiK R3 kernel, enable it, and then I'm going to make a change to my etc system config kernel to actually tell the system to use the YuiK. So the first thing is I'm going to go into my repo file. Which is the current file here. I'm just going to search for YuiK. There's my public YuiK latest. I'm going to change it to enabled here. So I'm going to be using that kernel on the YuiK. Now I'm going to vi the system config. I'm going to change it from kernel to kernel YuiK. By doing this now, this will actually have the installer pre-configure grub. Makes it a little more successful for the reboot to come straight into YuiK without having to make as many changes. Also, if you're doing any manual rebuilds of the kernel, it'll automatically know to use the YuiK kernel. So now we've done that, all we have to do now is install the YuiK kernel. And I'll get that kicked off here. So this again will take a little time, maybe 5 to 10 minutes depending on your internet. Obviously, if you have a slower connection to the US VM server, it could take longer. Example, if you're in Australia, it might take you 45 minutes to do this. If you're here in the US, it can take only 4 or 5 minutes, if that. So you can see here that we were actually synchronizing the repository. Then we'll start downloading the files here in a second. Not quite done synchronizing. Must have caught the repo right in the middle of an update. Usually if it doesn't change, it doesn't re-download the file. Now we have the kernels to download. They're not that large. Not quite 200 meg. So it shouldn't take that long to download them over Wi-Fi. Now we're installing the kernels. If you notice, it also installs the firmware. And now we should have an installed kernel here. And as soon as this is done, we're just going to go double check our grub configuration. Want to make sure the system will reboot into the YuiK kernel. So we'll bring up the side here for grub. We'll go edit the grub.conf. On a new system, what you will see is the first entry is usually the one that was added. We'll just make sure that's the YuiK kernel. We'll make sure that's the right default value. So the kernel's done. So I'm in my grub bootloader. And I'm going to look, my default is 0, and my first entry here is the YuiK kernel. I've seen on older systems, if this isn't a box you've scratch built to do this lab, sometimes they just don't end up in the order you'd expect it to, so it's always good to double check. But here everything worked out should. If you're not that familiar with grub, you can go to the document down here, and it'll take you to the link where you can configure grub. So now we're going to go ahead and reboot again. I'll do this one from the console. So again, we're rebooting, at least it won't take too long. And as soon as it comes up, we'll see that it's on the YuiK kernel. You can see here our kernel identifier is EL6YuiK, so we know we're booting on the YuiK kernel. We'll see the Oracle Linux here shortly in a second. And now we're up, and you'll see in our kernel, you can see it's EL6YuiK, so we already know we're on the YuiK kernel. We'll go ahead and just check it again. So now we'll see on the YuiK kernel. And congratulations, in just a couple minutes, we've been able to not only upgrade our system from 6.5 to 6.6, we've also moved it to the YuiK kernel without installing anything else running on the server. So you can do this to existing systems that have applications running, go through the upgrade process, and now you just have a faster machine and a cheaper machine to run. What's next is always the question. The YuiK kernel has some neat things into it. It has the OCFS file system. It also has the BTRFS file system. For those of you that might have been doing a lot of work with Solaris, you'll be familiar with the ZFS file system. BTRFS is similar to ZFS. It just runs under Linux. You also have things like ASMlib, which is a great way of managing ASM disk for your database, but none of the utilities are installed. So if you want to use ASM, you want to use BTRFS, you want to use OCFS too, would definitely recommend using Yum and installing utilities. Also, if you have database, or you want to install a database, there are some packages that are available from Oracle that automate all the prerequisites to install database. also eBusiness and Enterprise Manager. Example here, if I want to do 12c, is I can install Oracle RDMS Server 12CR1 pre-install. That package will set up all my prerequisites, install the yum packages that are required, actually add the Oracle user and groups, do all the minimal requirements to run it. You also might want to consider signing up for the Unbreakable support instead of the free one. You get advantage of the UL network for your patching. You get some better management once you register your systems there to monitor what's running what kernel, what's been patched, and you get the support, the 24/7 support out of the ULN network. A couple of URLs too that I've showed you here, haven't shown you yet. One is look at the linux.oracle.com. There's a wealth of information there to look at to learn a little bit more about Oracle Linux. Don't forget the public yum repository is actually a web server, and you can go look at the repositories there, see what packages are available. There's also some documentation there. And there's also the communities. Community.oracle and OTN has a whole section devoted to Linux. Oracle support's good for it's broken, how do I fix it? But the communities also provide a valuable tier of support on often why you should do something or if you have an opinion. There's a lot of opinions. Example, should I use ASM.lib to manage my database LUNs? That would be a place there to start that discussion. And you'll get some feedback from different users and admins. So now we're going to open up the system for Q&A for about the next 15 minutes. If you have any questions, feel free to pop up your chat window and ask away. I'll be here to answer them for you. Thank you. Okay, folks, we have about 5 minutes left for questions. Well, we're going to wrap up now. I'd like to go ahead and invite you, if you hadn't had a chance to get your question answered, go to the OTN communities and under system space, under the Linux forum, go ahead and post your questions there. And I'll be monitoring that closely over the next couple of weeks and we'll answer them. Thanks.